Hello everybody, the purpose of this video is to discuss academic referencing. What is referencing and how can you begin to use it in your work? The most common thing for new students or perhaps students that haven't got used to it, perhaps a little bit later on in their studies, is not to reference at all or only to reference one or two small things that are perhaps taken from a module guide or from some of the core texts. However, what we hope and show today is that referencing is a really important part of your university work, and it's really straightforward as well in terms of how you can get started with it. So when it comes to referencing, there's a few things to think about first, and the question at the top is why bother? Firstly, referencing helps you to avoid plagiarism. So if you are making claims in your work, or if you're copying things from the internet or from books or from journal articles, the most important thing is you give them a proper citation or proper support in your work. Otherwise, you could be at risk of plagiarism, which is essentially a type of cheating. So we encourage you to quote things from elsewhere. As we'll talk about in this video, your work is not an island. It should exist within the context of other pieces of work. So we just need to make sure that you are giving proper credit where it's due for the things you find. Secondly, it allows you to acknowledge the contribution of others. Once again, your work does not exist on its own. It's not an island. So other people will have contributed to the question that you're talking about or the question that you're trying to answer. And thirdly, you can provide evidence to support the claims that you're making. So if you're telling me something about a company or a theory, that's fine, but it's much more powerful if you can say someone else agrees with you or somebody else doesn't agree with you. So the quality of your reference is really important, and the best thing to think about is who provides the most authoritative voice on that subject. So for example, if you were writing about a bank, which we will go through an example in a moment, the most authoritative voice on that bank would be the bank itself. Now, whether you trust all the information that that bank is telling you, that's a different question and one for perhaps another video. But for now, if we were writing about a bank, then presumably the bank would give the most authoritative and accurate information that you're looking for. So that's quite easy when it comes to data, and slightly harder for academic theory. My advice for academic theory would be to go back to your module guide, to your module handbook, to your reading list, to your lecture slides, and find out exactly what theory has been covered in the module and use that in much the same way. So, for example, if your assignment question was to provide an overview of the banking industry and select a case bank to focus on and discuss its role in the sector, how might you go about doing that? So, firstly, I would recommend that you select a bank, which in this case can be, let's say, the Royal Bank of Scotland. Now, for the purposes of this video, we will pretend we don't know anything about the Royal Bank of Scotland and we're writing an assignment about them. So, firstly, this is the main Royal Bank of Scotland customer-facing website, which isn't really going to cover the requirements of what we need. We need more data about the bank. So we probably need to go on to the investor website to find out what that can tell us. So just by adding the word investor, I'm straight to the investor website here. So by looking at this investor website, I can see it seems to be very well populated. There's an annual report here, which looks good. There's some investor feedback, which might be useful to us as we're writing our report. But for now, I'm really interested in the headline figures. So if I come to the investor part and come down to the annual report, perhaps that's going to be helpful. So straight away, we can see rather predictably that the chairman has got something to say about this. So in 2018, the bank delivered a good financial performance despite an uncertain economic outlook. So that's really interesting straight away, that even the bank are admitting that there's an uncertain economic outlook and a highly competitive environment. So perhaps that's going to be useful for what we're talking about. If we come slightly further down, we can see that the bank had a 3,000 million operating profit, interest, tax. What I'm looking for here is the turnover, which is not very forthcoming. but it must be in the annual report. So if we were to open the annual report, perhaps we can find it somewhere in there. This kind of stuff is really useful, perhaps for your appendices. We can see that the bank's ambition is to be the #1 for customer service. That's good, it's useful, it's helpful in terms of the context that we're trying to talk about for our assignment. But for now, we're trying to find, here we go. So the income for the bank is 13,402 million in 2018. So if we were writing that up as a piece of work, it gives us a great starting point. So if this was the assignment question, provide an overview of the banking industry, select a case bank to focus on and discuss its role in the sector. So we can start that straight away. So we can say the Royal Bank of Scotland turned over, now how much was it? 13,402 million. 13,402 million pounds. And let's not worry about the reference for now. So we'll just put RBS XXX. So I know there's a reference to go there. But I'm not worried about it just yet. In 2018. And then we already have some interesting information from the annual report at the top of the investor page. So Howard Davis, who's the chairman, so we could put, this is fact, Howard Davis claim that the banking sector exists in a, so that's now, paste that in as a text only, and we can put that in as another citation. So check my spelling, and again, RBS XXXX for now. Direct quotes should be in italics, but please do check your university policy. They should also have something to distinguish them and make sure they are a quote. So you can see straight away that just by doing a tiny bit of research and a tiny bit of checking online, I've got 2 references to support the claim that I'm trying to make. Now, this is very biased because all we've done so far is go to the Royal Bank of Scotland, and we've only got data for 1 year, so 2018, and we know that it's an uncertain economic outlook. So we don't know a lot at this stage, but we do know something. We know that the bank turned over this amount. Now, it might be interesting if we could compare that to other banks. So perhaps we could go into our university's library system and find out what is available in terms of data. So this is Sheffield Hallam University's online portal, and if I go into the library, I can start. If we go to the A to Z of databases and come down to Statista, we have got it right there. So let's not forget we're talking about the banking sector in the UK. So let's have a look for what Statista can tell us. Banking sector. So it doesn't offer banking sector, but it does offer banking, which I suppose is much of the same thing. So let's have a look what we can find in terms of banking. So Lloyd's banking, most popular mobile apps. Now this is looking more promising. Banking in the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, US, banking in Europe. We can take that if nothing else is available. Banking and finance in the UK. That looks good. There's another one there, banking channels in the UK. So let's see what that can tell us. So that's more about visits to main current account branches. Perhaps that's not going to be so useful. Perhaps this one, banking and finance in the UK, is more useful for us, and it's looking like it is. So let's download that report and see what kind of things it talks about. Up the report now, we can see this is a Statista report, so it's of good quality. They're talking about the impact of Brexit. They provide an overview. Industry turnover, that's probably going to be useful for what we're talking about right now. So if we come down, we can see that the turnover for the banking sector in the UK is £136 billion. So perhaps that is quite useful for the Royal Bank of Scotland had turned over 13,000 million in the UK in 2018. And perhaps we could introduce this now. This is against the UK sector total turnover of 136.4 billion. 136.4 billion. And that is from Statista. And we'll come back to that as well. So this is becoming really useful. So suddenly we know that the Royal Bank of Scotland turned over 13 million, which on its own is completely useless information. That could be 90% of the sector, it could be 1% of the sector, we don't know. But now we've got the UK sector total of 136.4 billion. So that's starting to tell us a lot more. If we wanted to, we could go into the employees. The RBS have got 11,000 employees. The sector has 11,000 employees. And if we went back to the RBS report, we could find out how many employees RBS had. Probably less interesting than some of the other statistics we're able to present. And I'm just looking through this report now to see what kind of things might be able to help us. So this is quite interesting. They've done a SWOT analysis. Now, SWOT is very useful because it's a little piece of theory that you can introduce into your work. The good thing about SWOT as well is generally you don't really need to cite it because it's so well known. It's so saturated in the literature that you don't generally need to cite where it came from. It can just be a given. So this could be a really useful piece of information for your assignment. So you could copy this page or screen grab this page and put it into your appendices and talk about the impact of it on your work. So for example, let's just take one looking at it now. So one of the threats is Brexit uncertainties have already resulted in a massive exodus of employees of global banks, which is Goldman Sachs and other EU nations. So that could be really useful for our assignment. So we could say here, who provided this report? Statista. Statista analysis highlights that. Or you could say that Statista highlights Howard Davies' concern for the sector, claiming, and then we can put our quote in as well. Sometimes when you're copying things from the internet, it can go a little bit crazy. So you just need to fix the formatting a little bit, just like we're doing here. Hopefully, that provides a good citation for your work. So what we've done here over the course of visiting 3 or 4 different websites and reading a couple of different reports is we've gone from knowing nothing at all about the sector, knowing a little bit about something. So we now know the turnover for Royal Bank of Scotland in 2018. We know that the sector hasn't uncertain economic outlook. We know that the sector total is 136 billion, which makes Royal Bank of Scotland a reasonably small player in the industry. And we know that Statista have got similar concerns as the RBS chairman, claiming that Brexit uncertainties have resulted in a mass exodus of employees of global banks. So we're on to something now. The next thing we could start to look at, if we were going to take this further, is we could compare it to other banks. So you could start to introduce HSBC, Halifax, or similar. You could bring in other banks to answer your question. So provide an overview of the banking industry and select a case bank to focus on. So your case bank is always going to be the Royal Bank of Scotland, but how you approach that and how you get under the skin of what we're talking about is really important. So back to our presentation. So we've looked at how we can provide an overview of the banking industry and select a case bank to focus on. And what I'd like to talk to you about now, and we've touched on this partly in the video, is not all sources are equal, and think about the quality of the source that you're introducing. And I touched upon this argument earlier, but your work is not an island, and it must occur within the context of what is already known. What have other people done about this or similar questions? And by looking at the literature and looking at what's already been happened, it can help you to sharpen your research ideas. Now, the danger of this is you can turn out a little bit like Alice in Wonderland and end up down the rabbit hole, in that you can read for a long time. So I've already shown you the RBS annual report. You can see that I didn't spend very long reading it. I went straight in, got exactly what I needed, and kind of came straight back out. There's nothing wrong with reading and engaging with the work you're doing, but just be careful that you don't spend hours and hours and hours reading a report that's full of information that's not actually helping you to answer your objective of your assignment. So just think about that. So what I'd like to do now is for you to think about the quality of the reports that you're, or the quality of data that you'd like to use for your report. So here I've got a whole bunch of different sources that you might find information. So it goes all the way from government reports to the BBC, to a man shouting on the street with a big sign, company websites, journals. Have a look through the list and see if you can rank those in an order that you think will be most suitable. It might be a good idea to pause the video, but this is a great test to make sure that you've got a good idea of what the most suitable academic theory is for your work. So if you've completed this exercise, hopefully you can see your list looks a little bit something like this. So high up on the list is academic journals, peer-reviewed, or academic journals that aren't reviewed, although these are less common nowadays. We don't see so many of them. Thirdly, we have academic reports, Mintel, Marketline, Statista, and then coming on to things like broadsheets, Financial Times, The Times, The Guardian, the BBC, and the British Library. As we come down, we've got things like company accounts, government reports, conference papers, and this is all really useful information. Now, obviously, if you were talking about RBS, like in our example, this list wouldn't be entirely accurate. It would be unusual for an academic journal to discuss the turnover of RBS, and if they did, it would probably be outdated. So for the purpose of company information, this list might change a little bit, and you might find that company websites or company accounts might be the best place to find that information. But for general academic work, the best place you can start is an academic journal, academic reports, and good quality newspapers. Now, the further down you get this list, you end up in what I like to call a point of no return, which is the point in which you shouldn't quote things. So for academic work, you shouldn't really be quoting The Sun, the Daily Mail, the Daily Star, personal blogs. You shouldn't really be quoting Wikipedia. Now, Wikipedia is a personal favorite of mine in terms of quickly accessing information and quickly learning about something, Wikipedia is fantastic, but just don't cite Wikipedia. Wikipedia is excellent in terms of pointing you somewhere or helping you find something, but just for the purpose of your work, pretend that it never happened. Online news, Twitter posts, Facebook posts aren't suitable either, generally for academic work. And of course, the man shouting on the street with a big sign is the least reliable of all. So hopefully that is a useful series of instructions as to how you can assess the quality of the sources that you're using, although I've given you the example that perhaps this source of information will change depending on what you're writing about. In the next video, what we're going to talk about is how you can actually cite these arguments into proper references and how you can turn them into a proper reference list and make sure you're not getting feedback to say that you've done something wrong. So we'll do that next. And for now, thank you for watching. Goodbye.